My name's Carla Thompson. I'm with Jet Farms, Georgia. I'm also the Vice President of the GFVGA, and I'm going to moderate this session. So to moderate our next presentation regarding the fentanyl crisis in our agricultural communities, please welcome Senator Russ Goodman.
Well, thank y'all. I really don't have anything written down and prepared to say, so I just kind of want to tell the story of how Austin's Law and the FAIR Act and my journey with Gus and Beth Walters started. I've known Gus and Beth. Actually, I first met Gus and Beth. They had a mantle for sale, and I went with my mom over there. My mom had bought the mantle, and it's actually in her fireplace or over her fireplace right now. But Gus started emailing me, was it in 2023 that you started emailing, I believe? And, telling me the story of Austin and what had happened to their family. Austin was, a great kid, loved life. He was one of the top salesmen for Ag Pro in the country. But Austin suffered from depression and anxiety, and he bought some Xanax off the street. And one pill took his life. And so when Gus and Beth, when it happened, and Gus is going to speak later, but he can tell you the story, law enforcement told him that it was going to be a misdemeanor, that the person that sold him the fentanyl, that it was just a misdemeanor and there wasn't really anything they could do. And so Gus started emailing me and telling me the story and asking, what can we do to hold these people accountable? Well, of course, I'm a farmer. I have the honor of serving as the chairman of the Senate Ag Committee. I'm not an attorney. And so I started forwarding those emails to our Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones and to his Chief of Staff, Lori Ann Paradise, and his General Counsel, Brad Vaughn. And, I don't remember how many emails it was, but it was a good many, And so Brad and Lieutenant Governor and his office, they really went to work on it and started talking to DAs. And one of the things that we found out was under the law, the way it was at the time, people that were selling fentanyl that caused someone's death, they were able to basically not be held accountable for it when it caused someone's death because, I didn't know it had fentanyl in it. Well, fentanyl, 72% of all drug-related deaths are attributable to fentanyl. If you're selling illegal drugs, you know that there is a good chance that it could have fentanyl in it. It's the leading, I may have said that if I didn't, leading cause of death for people between the ages of 18 and 45. It's truly an epidemic. And, for illustrative purposes, I stopped this morning and brought a Splenda packet. This Splenda packet of fentanyl will kill 500 people. One semi-load of fentanyl coming into this country would kill every American citizen. Think about that. And so through the work with Burt Jones and his office and his general counsel, Austin's Law was drafted. And when we drafted the law, and of course it started making the news a little bit, I started getting emails and Facebook messages from mothers and fathers all over the state, really. I remember one specifically. Her name was Stephanie, and her son Ryan had died from fentanyl poisoning, and the person that had sold Ryan the fentanyl had killed 3 more kids since Ryan's death. And so Gus and Beth, they've really become family. I love them like family. And, they took something that was a tragedy and went to work and tried, if you can draw good from something of a tragedy like that, we were able to do that. They did that. And they came up, drove from Valdosta to Atlanta for every committee hearing. And when we passed that bill, y'all, it passed unanimously in both the Senate and the House. For a criminal justice bill like that to pass unanimously speaks to the fentanyl epidemic, because I can tell you something, fentanyl, it knows no race, no gender, no socioeconomic class, any of that. It affects, when we talk about illegal drugs, I tell people if cocaine and other illegal drugs are a BB gun, then fentanyl is a nuclear bomb. There's more people in this United States die every year from fentanyl poisoning than died in both of the bombings at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, to put that in perspective. And so we passed that bill. Actually, just about a month ago, Gus and Beth were on made national news. They were on CNN because we had our first conviction under Austin's law. And what Austin's law does is it creates a new crime of involuntary aggravated manslaughter in the sale of fentanyl that results in someone's death. We came back this year, or last year, I should say, with the FEAR Act. And so just in Sandy Springs, Georgia, there was enough fentanyl found in a 2-bedroom apartment to kill 2.5 million people in a 2-bedroom apartment. And so the law currently has it was treating fentanyl just like any other drug. And so obviously when you think about the toxicity of fentanyl, we felt like the law needed to reflect just how dangerous fentanyl was. And so we came back this past year and passed that law as well and adjusted those rates of what can consider to be trafficking fentanyl. It's really been, of all the work that I've been in the legislature now for 5 years, and I've had the opportunity to carry a lot of legislation, but the work that I've done with the Walters family is by and far that I'm most proud of. And I can tell you the fact that they, were willing to come out and tell their story. I don't believe this law would have ever been passed if they hadn't been able to do that. And it's amazing because I had people that I knew were good friends that had their husbands had passed away, or wives had passed away, or children had passed away. I had never knew that they'd passed away from fentanyl because of the stigma of it. And they came out and told their story. And as well, there's a good friend of ours in Valdosta, and it's not just, some of the harder drugs. We have a friend in Valdosta whose son bought a marijuana cigarette that was laced with fentanyl. They killed him as well. And so I'm really, really thankful for the work that we've done together. Thankful to Burt Jones and Brad Vaughn and his team, and really to everyone in the legislature that helped pass this bill. James Burchett, who carried it in the House, carried both bills in the House. Really proud of that work. And it really ties into what Tyler's going to talk about as well, because the cartels are using agriculture as a means to get this poison in our communities, and the work that they're doing as well. And I am known to get long-winded, Dominic. Have I gotten to that point yet? Am I good? But thank you, Sam. I appreciate it. I love you too. But anyway, and I'm probably forgetting something, and Gus will fill in the blanks that I've left. But they're really great Americans. They really, really are. They're heroes in my estimation. And the work that we're doing, I have no doubt, is going to save lives, and it's going to save lives of our young people. And Gus is going to speak, but before he does, he has a video that he wants to share. And then after that, Gus is going to come up and tell his story. And I just thank you all for giving me the time to speak today. Thank you for GFEGA for taking a moment. And I want to say one thing before I end, and that is this. One thing that I have found out through this process with all the mothers, I've become that dad. I've become that dad when I go to the HR house and all these kids are sitting there. I'm that dad taking the opportunity to tell those kids, do not take anything that anybody gives you. I don't care if it looks like an Advil. I don't care if it looks like a Tylenol. Do not take anything that anybody gives you, because it is this epidemic that's going around our country is robbing us of our children. And I would encourage everyone here to talk to your kids or your grandkids, nieces and nephews, and make sure that you warn them of the dangers of fentanyl. And with that, we're going to watch this video, and then my dear friend Gus is going to come up and speak. And thank you all for giving me the opportunity.
Austin was, he loved the outdoors. He was a very outgoing individual, loved to hunt and fish and be involved in the outside. Back when he was in college, he actually went to VSU and in the summers was
Please bear with us. I want to make sure we can all hear
fishing
this.
guide in Alaska.
I've got it all the way up on here. All right, play.
There we go. Push play.
Okay.
Austin was, he loved the outdoors. He was a very outgoing individual, loved to hunt and fish and be involved in the outside.
Can everyone hear? Okay, thank you.
Back when he was in college, he actually went to VSU, and in the summers was a fishing guide in Alaska. He never met a stranger. He really enjoyed being around his friends and his family. He was really kind of the glue to our family. When he was involved in family get-togethers, it was bound to be a good time, and he loved that very much. You know, it's really funny because it's kind of a contrast. He was a lot more outgoing as an adult and loved being with people and, you know, just being involved. And as a younger child, he was very quiet and very reserved.
He was just a great kid to have as a child. I felt so blessed.
He had a teacher once that said, "You're never going to have to worry about Austin having a heart attack, but he's going to give somebody a heart attack," because he just never got in a hurry about anything.
Austin did suffer from anxiety and depression. And there's a stigma attached to that, and there's especially a stigma attached to that if you are a male person in this world. Unfortunately, it is for everyone, but for males, it seems to be a little harder to get them to go to the doctor and get medication as it should be prescribed.
We knew that he needed somebody in his life, and he needed a companion. And as successful as he was, and as much as he enjoyed being with all of his friends, you know, at the end of the day, you go home and it's you and your dog. And that was a little depressing to him, and so he struggled with that. The day that we lost him, he had stayed home from work. He had not been feeling well, and he and I had talked 2 or 3 times during the day, just kind of touching base, and I was checking on him and everything else. And he had a roommate at the time that actually worked at AgPro, and the last conversation I had with him was at 4:30 in the afternoon. And he said, "Dad, I'm beginning to feel a little bit better." He said, "I think I'm going to lay down and sleep this off. I think I'll feel better in the morning." And I said, "Okay, you know, buddy, I love you." And, you know, we always said, "I love you." And we hung up. And about an hour later, his roommate had called Austin's little brother, Thomas, and said, "Hey, we have found Austin unresponsive, and we've called EMS." And that's when our nightmare began.
When we lost Austin, when he died, that was during a COVID time, and he lived in Brunswick, Georgia. Gus raced to the hospital, and they were going to try to airlift him that night, and there was a horrible storm, so they could not airlift him, and he had to go by ambulance, which they told us they didn't even know if he would make it to Jacksonville to the hospital. So, like I said, it was during a COVID time, and that was a no-visit hospital. So it was almost 2 o'clock in the afternoon the following day. We had no idea what was going on. And then we finally got the call that it was not going to be okay and that he was not going to make it. And so we had to make a horrendous decision of having machines turned off, and you're in Valdosta and he's in Jacksonville, and that was very tough.
We were very uneducated when it came to fentanyl and how dangerous it was and how prolific it had grown in the United States. We didn't know all of that until we lost him.
Welcome back to 11 Alive News at 6. Drug dealers could face harsher new penalties under a law just signed by Governor Brian Kemp.
During that process, we realized that they kept saying the word fentanyl to us. We had no idea what fentanyl was. So quickly, we Googled, what is fentanyl? What is this? And things began to unfold. And after Austin's death, we contacted the police, and we had everything. We had a phone with his information, where he bought the pill, the Venmo. We had conversations with the drug dealer that were on Austin's phone. We had everything we thought we needed.
Americans are dealing with fentanyl, and so increased penalties and doing that to honor Austin's life and having his family here was very special.
People have a tendency to think that addiction, opioid addiction or fentanyl or whatever, isn't going to happen to them. You know, they have a tendency to visualize the person that lives under the bridge or sleeps on the street or, you know, has this problem, they can't keep a job, can't stay in a relationship or something like that. And this drug, fentanyl, is killing everybody, you know, and Austin didn't have any idea that when he took that one pill that he wasn't going to wake up again. And we have got to have these conversations with our kids, and we've got to be very matter of fact about them. These need to be one of the more serious conversations that we have with our children, and let them know that you can't take a pill that's given to you from another individual, whether it's somebody that's a college roommate of yours or whether it's a best friend. It does not matter unless you got the prescription yourself from the pharmacy and it came out of your bottle. You don't need to touch it because you have no idea where it came from, and you have no idea whether or not you're going to wake up.
Good morning. First, I want to sincerely thank the Southeastern Fruit and Produce Growers Association, and especially our dear friend Russ Goodman, for always putting us in front of people and allowing us to share Austin's story. I got to get off script for just a minute. I walked in this morning, and it just kind of hit me that it is so unbelievably ironic that Austin loved the outdoors and he worked in the ag industry. And here we are speaking at this ag show. I do not believe in coincidences. Obviously, this is all God. And this is where we're supposed to be telling our story. So again, thank you. This is a cause that is incredibly important to Beth and me, and it needs to be important to every single person in this room. I'm not here because I think we can bring Austin back. We can't. But I am here for each of you, for your children, for your grandchildren, for your loved ones, for your friends, for your coworkers. I'm here to tell you that there has never been a more important time than right now to have a conversation with your family and your friends and your coworkers about the dangers of fentanyl. Over the last 4 years, Beth and I have talked to so many parents, good parents, who were completely caught off guard, who look at us and say things like, "We never suspected. We didn't have a clue. What am I supposed to do now?" And yet here they are, standing with us in the darkest, most dreadful place a parent can ever be. Sure, we had heard about it on the news. We were those parents, Beth and I, who were uneducated. And like I said, we heard about it on the news. We thought it was just another drug on the street, something kids were experimenting with. And that was it. That was all that we knew. And we couldn't have been more wrong. Fentanyl is not just another drug. Fentanyl is a killer. That's why you hear the phrase, one pill kills. We actually have a close friend who had a 24-year-old son who had graduated from Georgia Tech and was in the process of going to an interview for his first job with his degree in his hand. And he was nervous the night before, and he took a half a pill. And he didn't wake up the next morning. There is no experimenting with fentanyl. There are no second chances. Let me share a few statistics, and Russ has already talked about them a little bit. In the United States, over 100,000 people a year die from fentanyl, roughly one person every 7 minutes. I was talking to someone earlier in this room, and I was saying, if we had that's 200 people a day, okay? If there was a plane that fell out of the sky every single day and 200 people died, what do you think would happen? I mean, the whole world would stop. They would ground the planes, the NTSB would get involved, the whole world would stop until they figured out what the problem was. But fentanyl is a silent killer, and our world isn't stopping. We continue to move forward. Fentanyl is the leading cause of death in Americans from 18 to 45 years old. More than cancer, more than car accidents, more than heart disease, it is fentanyl. And these are not hardened drug users. These are kids taking what they believe is a pain pill or an anxiety pill or something that a friend said was going to be safe. These are productive adults not looking to end their lives. Austin was one of them. Austin was our son, a friend, a young man with a future, and fentanyl took him from us in just a few minutes. Out of this unbearable loss came action, and that action led to Austin's Law and later to the FEAR Act here in Georgia. These laws were not created to educate or bring awareness. These laws were passed to do something very specific, and that was to hold criminals accountable. They exist to say that when someone knowingly traffics, distributes, or participates in life-threatening fentanyl activity, innocent people die as a result, there are going to be consequences. And we've just had the most recent and first convictions in the state of Georgia. And I'm proud to say that those people didn't even go to trial. They basically plea bargained because they knew the strength in the law, and they knew that if they didn't, they would serve maximum sentences. One of them has gone to jail for 20 years and the other one for 12. And prior to these laws being enacted, they might have served 3 years for killing somebody. 3 years, it's not okay. That's why Beth and I also founded Austin's Promise. Austin's Promise is our nonprofit organization built on the foundation of building education and awareness and prevention so that we can educate other families. It exists because families deserve the truth before it's too late. We speak in schools, churches, and community groups in rooms just like this one because fentanyl does not stay in the big cities. It does not stay in certain neighborhoods. It shows up everywhere. I want to be very clear about this. Fentanyl does not discriminate. It doesn't care how good the kid is. It doesn't care about the grades or the upbringing. It doesn't care what zip code you were raised in or you live in. It doesn't care about sex, race, or socioeconomics. Beth and I are not here asking for sympathy. We really just want you to act. That's what we want you to do. Have the conversation. Share the facts. Warn the families. Talk to your children, your grandchildren, your friends, your coworkers, other members of your family. Have that hard conversation. Austin's Promise is not just a name of an organization. It's a commitment. And today I want to ask you to make a commitment. I want you to make the promise to have the hard conversation even when they're uncomfortable. I want you to make the promise not to assume this could never happen to my family. I want you to make the promise to talk openly and honestly about fentanyl, what it is, how deadly it is, and how fast it kills. Beth was talking about the day that we had to make the difficult conversation. The neurologist from Baptist Hospital in Jacksonville called, and obviously we had the family together, and we were like, you got to, tell us the true facts. Tell us what we're looking at. And they basically said, she said, he'll never make it out of bed. He won't ever know a single day that he's here. We've been able to find out that his brain had over 100 strokes. Beth and I can't bring Austin back, but together we can help other families from standing where we stand. If Austin's life and his loss leads to even one family being spared this pain, then his story has a purpose. And that's why we came today. That's why I'm standing up here talking to you. I want you to make that promise. You have to have the conversations. You have to educate. You have to raise awareness. Use the pulpit you have. Use what you have where you are and talk about the dangers of fentanyl. We talk about 100,000 people a year died from fentanyl. How many of y'all remember when Nancy Reagan started the campaign, Just Say No to Drugs? Y'all remember that? They had the commercial on TV where they showed the egg. They showed the raw egg and said, this is your brain, and then they threw it in a pan and said, this is your brain on drugs. Do you know that when she started that campaign, 8,000 people were dying a year? But she felt like it was powerful enough to start a program. And here we are, 30 years later? And we're losing 100,000 people a year to fentanyl. So we've got to do something. And it's left up to you sitting in this room. Okay, it starts with you. I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank you for caring. And I want to go ahead and thank you for making that promise today. I appreciate this opportunity very much. Thank you.
Well, good Lord. Our next speakers are going to be Commissioner of Agriculture Tyler Harper and his head of his law enforcement division, Harlan. Harlan's a great South Georgian, by the way. Y'all, we all know that these cartels and these drug dealers are using agriculture as a means to get this poison in our community. And not only do you have the food safety aspect of it, but you also have the fact that it's hurting our farmers. Because I can promise you, it wasn't that long ago that Harlan and his team discovered 2,500 pounds of methamphetamine and a load of Mexican celery. I can promise you that those folks didn't care what they got for that celery. And not only that, you think about the fact that those methamphetamines were mixed in with that celery, and you think about what that means as far as the food safety and food security aspect of that. I was honored as one of the things that Tyler did. I'm going to brag on him. I mean, he's, in my opinion, the hardest working ag commissioner in this country. And when he came into office, he wanted to bring back the law enforcement division, and I was honored I got to carry the legislation in the Senate to help bring that into fact. And they're doing remarkable work. And what's going on with these cartels, when you think about what it means not only to our farmers, but the fact that they're using that mechanism of agriculture to get it in our community, it's something that needs to be addressed, and it needs to be addressed around the country. And I wish that every ag commissioner in this country was doing what Tyler is doing, and I want to thank you for that. One thing I've always appreciated about Tyler is he's not afraid to stand up for what's right and say what he thinks and go to battle for our farmers. And that's one of the reasons that I'm so proud where he is. And with that, Tyler, do you mind coming up and sharing a little bit about what your agency is doing?
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you, buddy.
Appreciate it. Yes, sir. Well, good morning. First off, I know Chris was in here a second ago, but want to say thanks to Chris, Beth, Carla, Russ, Sam, everybody. Thank y'all for just giving us the opportunity to be a part of this. And what our role is in discussing this is the enforcement side and working to keep things like what both Gus and Beth have experienced from ever happening. And that's what we're going to talk about this morning. But first off, to Gus and Beth, thank you for being brave and taking the time to stand up and having your voice heard. As you said, Gus, for those of us in the ag community, if we don't think it's happening in our backyard, we need to wake up. Just this past fall, we had 2 farmers that were lost to a very similar issue on their farm late at night. And so it is imperative that we have these conversations in our ag communities and talk about these issues to ensure that our farm families and everybody knows that there are resources that they can tap into to help them take care of themselves. And that's kind of getting off on a tangent a little bit. That's the reason we have really been investing in our mental health resources through the Department of Agriculture. We have been working with our partners at University of Georgia, Mercer University, and the Extension Service, and other partners, private partners across the state and even across the country, in focusing resources and providing access to care that our farmers know that's there. And I think a lot of times those of us in the ag community have this mentality because it's how we're raised. As a young boy or a young girl on the farm, when something happens or something breaks down, your dad or your parents tell you to go fix it, figure out how to fix it for yourself. Well, I think in our lives, because we're raised with that mentality of we break it, we fix it, I think a lot of times we have that mentality about our person, ourself. And I think a lot of times that's where it leads to these issues, where we think we have to fix ourselves without reaching out to somebody for assistance or help. And so I think the first line of defense is always trying to ensure that people know that there is assistance and there is help available for individuals regardless of your background. And there are folks here that understand agriculture that are willing to talk you and help you talk you through those issues, whether it's mental health or drug abuse or addiction or whatever that is. And we're proud of our partnerships at the department and the work that we're doing in that space, hopefully to be a preventative measure to help families and individuals and producers and farmers know that there are resources for them out there to help them regardless of the issue that they're dealing with. And so we're going to continue to focus our efforts there. But when it comes to the other side of the coin is the prevention of it ever getting into our communities and ever getting to our streets. As Russ mentioned, one of the a lot of things that we've done at the department now in my 3 years, but one of the things that I think has shown the need for and also has proven the reason of why we did what we did is the reinstatement of our law enforcement unit at the Department of Agriculture. Historically, the department had law enforcement. We brought it back, and with the help of Russ and Sam and Robert Dickey and others in the General Assembly, they've helped us get some resources and tools that we need to do our job. And we've also been working through funding through grants and other ways to help ensure that we have those resources to allow us to take on what we know was an issue. For those of you that don't know, when I served in the state senate for a decade, I'm a farm boy and ag is my heart, but I was asked to serve as the chair of the Public Safety Committee in the state senate. So I led our public safety efforts in the state senate for almost 4 years. And during that time, as chair of that committee, I learned a lot about issues that are ongoing in our public safety and law enforcement sector across the state. And some of the things that I learned during that time is the way that agriculture was starting to be used by criminals for criminal activity and purport their criminal activity. And so when I become Commissioner of Agriculture, and with that knowledge and that understanding, that was one of the basis and the reason of why we reinstated our law enforcement unit to ensure that we're able to address those issues and find ways to ensure that we're protecting agriculture, protecting our farmers, and protecting consumers at the end of the day. One of the biggest issues that we're finding, obviously, when it comes to fentanyl, yes, there are a lot of drugs that are are shipped into our nation, or our country, unfortunately. But fentanyl, in some cases, is used to cut those drugs. It is used as an additive by drug dealers, which doesn't make sense to me, because why would you put something in something that's going to, you're killing off your clientele, apparently. But they use it. So fentanyl can be found basically in almost any type of drug. So it's not just on its own. It can be found mixed in with numerous other drugs. So for us as a department, obviously fentanyl is something that we are concerned about, but we're concerned about the entire spectrum, because we know it all can be detrimental, and that fentanyl can be part of any of that in the spectrum of the drug trade. One of the issues that we have seen, especially across the border, is in Mexico, the cartels have significantly taken control of agriculture in Mexico. You basically can't farm in Mexico unless you have the permission of the Mexican cartel. Not only that, you pretty well can't ship your product into the United States without the permission of the Mexican cartel. We know that through significant intelligence and opportunities that Harlan and his team have been a part of, and work that we're doing in collaboration with our friends on the international stage, along with our friends, basically every lettered agency that you can think of on the federal and state level, and the work that we're doing together to have an understanding of how do we address this, how do we ensure we keep it out of the state of Georgia. But unfortunately, the cartels utilize agriculture in a way that allows them to, for all practical purposes, for money laundering, to wash their money. And they have to have a way to move their product. And they use agriculture to do that. That's how they get their products across the border into the United States, under the guise of an agricultural food product. We, and our team, has went to work since day one, working with all our partners across the state. But primarily, obviously, a lot of that focused on the Atlanta State Farmers Market. For those of you that know or are aware of the Atlanta market, it basically is the produce terminal and vegetable terminal of the southeastern United States. For the most part, if you sit in a restaurant, or you sit go to a grocery store in the southeastern U.S., there is a good probability that some of that produce went through the Atlanta State Farmers Market at some point in its journey. And so who else knows that distribution network is in place? Those that want to purport criminal activity, because the distribution network already exists. So it makes it a lot easier for you to move your product amongst further distances and utilize a network that already is in place, and find ways to coerce those that are part of that network to help you do that. And so that's what we're seeing more and more of. So we've really stepped up our efforts at the Atlanta market, which has resulted in a lot of different things. We have intercepted significant amounts of product in a lot of different ways. One of Russ mentioned this just a second ago, the largest methamphetamine bust in southeastern U.S. history was a joint operation between us and the DEA, where we intercepted a load of 2,500 pounds of methamphetamine in a shipment of celery. Come directly from Mexico to the Atlanta State Farmers Market. Our agents partnered and embedded with the DEA. We watched them unload the semi. We watched them separate the drugs and the celery. We watched them load the drugs back up. And we watched the whole operation go down. Whenever our officers and the DEA went in, unfortunately, the celery that was being separated from the product was still bound for the grocery store. So what we did, and I asked, because after I got there, I said, well, why don't we go through these boxes? Because I'm kind of curious as to what's in here. Let's just make sure there's nothing there. So we started ripping open the boxes of celery that were bound for the grocery store, and we still had drug dogs hitting on those boxes because we started finding shards of methamphetamine still in those boxes of celery. Now, for me, as the commissioner, that becomes a significant concern, because now I have food product that was used to ship drugs into this state from another country that is contaminated with those drugs that are now bound for a grocery store shelf. That's concerning. It was methamphetamine, but what if it was fentanyl? And what if it was that, and we have somebody grab that packet at the grocery store and put it in their grocery cart, unknowing that that bag that they just grabbed was laced with a drug? It is a huge food safety issue. So obviously, none of that made it to the grocery store. We destroyed every bit of that. But that is a huge concern for us in every load that we intercept. Cocaine and peppers, meth and blueberries, marijuana on a banana truck. There's so many stories that we can work through where our team has worked with our other partners to intercept and take out these issues. The other part of that is, and this is where it gets back to ag, is, and Russ mentioned this a second ago, is our friends across the border in Mexico, because they're using agriculture for this purpose, agriculture is not the reason they're in the business of agriculture. They're not in the business of producing food to make a living. They're not in the business of growing celery and peppers and blueberries in Mexico, especially the cartel-involved farms. They're not in the business of growing those products to ship it to the United States to try to make a living. That undermines and undercuts our producers right here at home. Because when they flood the marketplace with product and they undercut our price that we get at the wholesale marketplace, our farmers can't compete. It's not fair. Our farmers have a competitive disadvantage, significant competitive disadvantage, when it comes to competing with our counterparts in other countries. And it's not just, you can get in the whole Tier 4 engine conversation. We can get into the whole food safety conversation that we already have an unfair playing field as it is, labor. But then you add on top of that how they utilize this as a means to move to move this poison into our nation. It just adds a whole new layer to this conversation that undermines our farmers' ability to be able to compete. And so for us at the Department of Agriculture, it is another reason why we are in this fight to stop it. Because we know every time we stop that, every time we undermine that, every time we're able to get these drugs off the street that are shipped in produce, we're able to help farm families and farmers in our state continue to be competitive in the marketplace. I know we still have a lot of challenges there, but it helps. And secondly, we can ensure that we keep safe food on the grocery store shelf, and we don't have to worry about families being concerned about the product that they're buying. Which is why, as I travel the state, I tell folks all the time, that's the reason you buy Georgia grown, and that's the reason you buy American grown, because you have confidence in the product that you're buying, and you're not supporting those that are trying to undermine our families, our children, our kids, by utilizing that network of shipping poison into our country. So there's a lot going on in this particular regard that we're working on every single day, and I'm really proud of the work that our guys are doing. And obviously, it's not just drugs. It's not just drugs and produce. The issues we're running into as an agency are a lot more significant than that. We're currently working a lot of human trafficking cases where we have seen the cartel become more involved in that as well. We actually are working some cases here in our state right now, our team is, where farmers have been involved and issues have arose, where there have been interaction with the cartel related to H-2A labor that they're utilizing in their operation, and that is a concern for us. So not only are they in the drug trade, they're also in the labor trafficking trade, as we know. And the cartels are getting significantly more and more involved in that. And it's something that we're seeing more and more of as an agency, and our law enforcement unit is seeing more and more of, and it's something that we're taking very seriously. And again, are working that in conjunction with international partners and our state and federal partners in finding ways to ensure that we're able to cut that off at the forefront so that activity doesn't happen in our state. Another thing that we have seen here, and we talk about a lot, are our foreign adversaries. And one of the things that we did with the legislature's help a couple of years ago is we banned foreign adversaries and those who are from a foreign country that are a foreign adversary of the United States from owning farmland in our state. We think that's a huge step in national security because at the end of the day, food security is national security. Food safety is national security. Agriculture is national security, period. And one of the things that I heard in that conversation was, well, especially from those on the other side of the aisle, well, where are these Chinese farms? Who they don't have any in the state of Georgia. Well, I beg to differ because our law enforcement unit helped take down the largest marijuana indoor grow in state history that was operated and owned by Chinese nationals. We arrested 4 individuals in this particular operation. Over $22.5 million worth of marijuana was on site at the time of the grow on an operation in southeast Georgia. And so not only in ag, and they were doing this all under the guise of a food processing facility, by the way. So they were purporting to be an agricultural operation processing food for human consumption. To be more specific, they were supposed to be processing fish, packaging fish to be consumed by humans at the store. They were purporting to be that. That was their cover op. But they operated under that cover and were in the drug trade completely. Since then, obviously, working with federal and state partners, we have learned that the Chinese and others have worked to build out crime syndicates across the United States. This is organized crime. This particular operation has been connected to an operation both in the states of New York and Texas, as an example. And so this is another example of what the work that we're doing through the Department of Agriculture and our law enforcement unit is doing to help keep this poison off our streets, to help keep those that are enemies of ours from utilizing agriculture as a means to an end to harm our kids, to harm our families, to harm our farmers. And so I'm proud of the work that we're doing at the Department of Agriculture. I'm proud of the work that our team is doing every single day. I'm proud of our partnerships that we have. And Russ, to your point, there are a number of departments of agriculture across the country that have law enforcement arms, and I agree. Some of them we work really, really closely with, and they're in this fight with us. And I appreciate the partnership that I have with my commissioners, my fellow commissioners of agriculture across the country. This is something that we do talk about quite a bit, and how we can continue to partner to protect agriculture, to protect our farm families, and protect those from ever being able to have this poison injected in their families. And so I'm proud of the work that we're doing. That's just kind of a good overview. Harlan just told me to handle it, so he's here to answer questions if anybody has any specific questions. But that's a basic overview of some of the work that we're doing, and that's not getting into everything that our law enforcement unit is doing, obviously. But this is specifically focused on keeping this poison off our streets, specifically focused on leveling the playing field for our farm families. And there's a lot that's going into this, and I'm really proud of our team and our work and our partnerships with the legislature and others in making this happen. So thank y'all for letting me be here. Thank you for letting us be a part, and we'll be happy to answer any questions if anybody has any. So thank y'all.
All right, we've got about 10 minutes left, and I'll say it again. Closer. I apologize. All right, Tim, we got about 10 minutes left, and does anyone here have any questions for any of us? I mean, you have any questions for Gus or Harlan or Commissioner Harper? in terms of fentanyl or the work that we've done in the legislature or the work that they're doing at the department? Does anyone have any questions? Or absolutely.
So when we grew in Mexico, obviously, and I guess that's why we're not growing anymore, because we weren't part of the drug community, because it's hard to make money growing down there. We know a lot of farmers in western Mexico don't have to pay, they would openly tell us, pay $1 million, $500,000 just for the drug lords to keep them away. I mean, that's very prevalent in western Mexico. We freighted our vegetables over. It cost $6 a box on ocean freight, but a lot of those vegetables grown in Mexico are trucked over. Law enforcement, have you seen an improvement in that with borders being closed? And what are the stats of, it's been a little bit since I've read that, but the amount of trucks that come across our border, you know, we need 100 more lanes to inspect, or whatever, however many more lanes to inspect every semi-load. And how are we doing with that? You know, do we inspect 5% of the loads coming over or 10%? And what is that looking like, you know, with the borders being shut down? Do y'all have better success? That's kind of a multi-layered question, but what is that looking like as far as the trucking coming over?
So I'm gonna hand this over to the Commissioner, but Commissioner, if you don't mind, when you repeat her question, I know they'd asked us to do that so it could be recorded. Thank you.
Repeat her question.
All right, so her question basically was kind of setting the foundation of they farmed in Mexico. They no longer do because of just the cost of it, but a lot of that cost obviously is tied back to the cartel. You basically have to pay the cartel to farm in Mexico. You have to pay the cartel to have irrigation rights in Mexico now. They are significantly controlling that trade. But as those that still have operations, how do we move product out of there? A lot of that is moved by truck. So the question was, is there more inspection of those trucks? How are those trucks getting across the border? And with the administration's efforts of tightening the border, is that having an impact on less of that coming across? Did I sum that up pretty good? All right, and I'm going to hand it to Harlan, who's our law enforcement director, to handle it.
Yeah, that's a good question. As far as trucking drugs over the border, you know, only a small percentage of those get checked, right? So the Border Protection works closer with intelligence, right? If they get intelligence that a certain truck is coming across the border carrying illegal drugs, then of course those are the ones they target. But as far as just general checking, it's a small percentage. And so, you know, the cartels know how to work that, right? They put up folks that place the border under surveillance, and they see which lanes are moving fast. There's all kind of strategy that they use to get drugs across the border. It's not just carrying them across. There's a lot of strategy that goes into that. Mexico's having some internal issues right now. If you know that they killed one of the mayors over there and you're protesting in reference to agriculture, and as the commissioner said earlier, we've got some really good partnerships now in Mexico, believe it or not. And so those partnerships have been vetted, and we're working very closely with them on these issues. But as far as it slowing down, I don't see it slowing down. The commissioner mentioned H-2A and the cartels now being involved. I think the borders being secure is helping, but I think what you're going to see is the cartels get involved in other means of agriculture, right? And the H-2A program is one of those.
So her question was related to resources, mental health, other things related to farmers and producers. So that is a partnership between us, the University of Georgia, primarily the Extension Service, Department of Behavioral Health, DBHDD in the state. We are partnering with Mercer University is actually who done the study that really kicked this off, that showed that 30% of farmers in Georgia have contemplated suicide in the actually 40% of farmers in Georgia contemplated suicide within the last 12 months, which was a startling statistic, which is why we really amped up those efforts. But we know that it's more than suicide, right? We know that it's depression and it's It's things where, like Gus and Beth's story, where we have folks like Austin who lean on other means to help address issues that they have internally, where we could have, if they reached out to these other resources, folks like Austin would be here with us today, right? And so that's why we're working to provide those resources. So our website, if you go to the Department of Ag website, we have a mental health page. UGA Extension also does, DBHDD. So all of those resources are available on that website, and the things that we're working to do together in our partnership to help tell the story, to help ensure that people know that, hey, it's okay to ask for help. I think in ag, that's been my message. It goes back to what I said earlier. I think we always think we have to take care of ourselves. My message has been clear that, if we're in ag, it's okay to ask for help too. And so regardless of what the issue is, but we're happy to help in any way at the department. Extension is DBHDD and others. If there's something specifically you need help with or need specific information, let us know. We'll be happy to help provide that.
Yeah, what are the things that a grower can do to recognize issues that need to be reported? And I think those indicators of, if you learn the indicators of labor trafficking, human trafficking, those are things that we want to know about. Barbed wire fence around housing, not allowing workers the freedom to cash their checks or to go to the store. There's a lot of indicators, and we're going across the state now, and we're teaching those indicators, and we have a task force that's helping us with that. And so we have a hotline, that you can call, and we will investigate any of those suspicions. Even if you don't think it's to the point that you need to report it to us. And if it's nothing, then it's nothing, but we definitely want to look into that and make sure.
Talk about too, if you're a farm that uses an FLC, go to that FLC's housing, go to those workers. Can you cash your check anywhere? Are they holding your ID? That is something I see a lot, that a lot of farms that use FLCs, the FLC's handle it. The farmer's busy, we're all busy, but do your due diligence to check that FLC. That is so important.
That's right, and have those conversations with your H-2A contractors, those that are contracting your workers. The farmer's not out there, you're not out there going to Mexico and getting this labor. You're working through your contractors. Make sure that you're having those conversations with your contractors as well, and you're sharing information back and forth. Yes, ma'am.
Hey, I was curious, for those who already are dependent on those illegal substances, is there anything in the works to promote harm reduction, like fentanyl test strips or wider availability of Narcan or anything like that, just for another step in the prevention process?
So there are agencies that provide the Narcan test strips and things like that, and there's a big push in the state of Georgia to make sure every ambulance, every peace officer in the state of Georgia has the test strips, has Narcan to respond. Every one of my officers have Narcans in their vehicles and test strips as well, including mine. So there is a big push, and there's grant money that it's not costing agencies anything. They're providing that free of charge.
Didn't they put it in schools too?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Yeah, I think you can buy it over the counter now as well, and keep it home.
Isn't there fentanyl in those little vape things now that are in schools? They're even in the vape.
Or you want me to talk to that? So obviously, at the department, we're involved in the hemp stuff as well. We regulate hemp. We license hemp. One of the things that we do a lot of is we're in and out of gas stations that are supposed to be licensed by us and selling those products, but we do run into a lot of the vape issues. What we're seeing a lot of there are significant issues where those vapes are laced with a lot of different things. It's not just CBD. It's not just a CBD or a THC vape. There is a possibility that there could be fentanyl in that vape. Yes, so we are seeing a lot of that. I will tell you the biggest concern that we see are the issues of foreign imported product, even in gas stations that are selling it under the guise of a CBD or a hemp product. And so our law enforcement unit, working with state and federal and local partners, obviously we're working to address those issues every single day. Last week we just did a under 21 undercover operation. We've done a couple of those across the state, but we've done another one where we're 7 out of the 10 were found to be selling product to under 21 kids. And so we're holding them accountable. We're taking them to jail. We're writing them citations. We're arresting them. We're seizing their product. We're taking their stuff out. So to your point, I understand where your question's going, but there's a lot more that's going into that than just that there's some fentanyl in a few vapes. And so it's a bigger issue that we're trying to work to address on that front as well. But yeah, it's definitely a concern.
Can we take one more? Okay.
We have time? Yeah, that's it. Okay, so Mr. Gus, if you could just talk about Austin's Promise more, about the organization and how to find more information.
Yeah, we started the nonprofit organization Austin's Promise so that we can have a platform to educate. We go into schools and churches and other organizations and talk about, awareness and educate about fentanyl and having those difficult conversations. You can find Austin's Promise online. Be more than happy to accept any donations to help support that cause. Thank you.
Well, I think with that, our time is up, but I want to thank everyone for being here. I want to thank GFEGA for allowing us to do this and bring awareness, and thank you for the questions and, for your interest in this. And I just want to close with what Gus said. Talk to your loved ones about this. Talk to your kids, your grandkids, nieces, and nephews. Appreciate y'all.
And I want to thank all of our speakers here today for your work and for sharing that with us today. So thank you.
All right, we're ready to get started with the next session. So this is your 1040 to 1120 Ag Labor Update. We are blessed to be joined by Chris Schulte from Fisher Phillips. Chris has been working with us on immigration for a long time, but I'm really glad that he's at Fisher Phillips now and is heading their team. From a GFEGA standpoint, selfishly speaking, Chris has been working with us a lot on the coalition that we have. It's now up to 38 organizations across 7 states that is focused on the AWARE issue and trying to get legislation passed to codify the positive changes that were made last year. So without further ado, Chris is going to go through some of the big changes that we've had, then we'll do a little tag team fireside chat afterwards. But without further ado, Chris Schulte from Fisher Phillips.
All right, thank you, everybody. I'm going to start with, this is an old Ronald Reagan, because we were talking about that I'm here from Washington, I'm here to help. Those are usually kind of like, be careful, or like, I'm a lawyer, I'm from Washington, like, check your wallet, make sure everything's there. All right, but we actually have good news this year, so you came at the right time. So step one, you remember kind of at the end of the Biden administration, they put out a rule, they called it the Farm Worker Protection Rule. Whenever they're talking about protecting workers' rights or things like that, it's a good thing, but that usually is code for we're about to make your life a lot harder and add requirements to it. These were some of the provisions that they wanted to do. Some of it was simple, kind of if there's a seatbelt, you should use it. Sure, that's fine. Some of it was basically creating unions on farms, which was something that has never been the case here. There's some states that chose to do that over the years, but kind of going back to when they created union protections under FDR in the 30s, they specifically said, well, that's not a good fit for farms. You can't just go on strike if you're a farm. So they've always excluded that from there. So things about, if workers had grievances, you'd have to have a process. If you wanted to discipline somebody, you'd have to give them a warning and then suspend them, and you'd have to have their advocate there with you to go through it and give them an opportunity. It was just this elaborate process that may work if you're a steel worker or a teamster. It's not going to work if you just somebody who's late to work on a farm. And so, led by GFEGA, they filed a lawsuit over in Brunswick and were able to get an injunction on the rule. So that covered 17 of the states. 2/3 of the states still had it in effect, though. People that had not joined in that coalition and not joined in the lawsuit were still dealing with it. So there were other lawsuits in Kentucky, in Mississippi, I think there's one in Gulfport. So different people had sued with different results. They were able to block pieces of it. The one in Georgia blocked the whole thing. And so at some point, it just became unworkable. So they suspended enforcement of it last year and then ultimately decided under the new administration, what are we doing here? This is something that Congress had, it's not just that they hadn't spoken to it, they specifically said hands off, like don't put unions on the farms. And so they walked that back. And so they've closed the comment period on it now. We're just waiting for the final rule, but basically it's not being enforced. So it's there, but it's a dead letter. The only pieces of it that stayed on were essentially if a worker asks you to hold their passport so they don't lose it. They're out in the field. They need that to get home back to their family. The concern was always that it was a trafficking situation, that if the employer took their passport, that they would be bound there. They wouldn't be able to leave. They wouldn't be able to go find other work. They wouldn't go home. Now they're saying, look, if they ask you to, that's fine. They just have to ask you first. And if they ask for it back, you give it back to them. Seems simple. So this is actually more protective of employers because it creates a situation where in those scenarios you can do it rather than hey, we can't touch it. You're on your own. Go buy yourself a padlock and good luck. This is saying no, we'll keep it in the office, and when you want it back, you get it back, done. And so on the overtime, the last one, it's not saying that you have to offer overtime, but if you do, in states where you do, you just say that you do. Makes sense. But other than that, they've completely torn up the rule. So that was an early win in the new administration for farms. The wage change. This has been, took a little bit longer to come through, but has been another big win. You'll remember that here, go back for a second. This goes back to 2023. This is another one from the previous administration. They decided that farm worker wages were too low, that you all weren't paying enough for wages, and we needed to do something about that. And specifically for occupations that were outside what they called the Big Six, so like farm worker, grader sorter packer, an ag equipment operator, tractor driver. If anybody's driving a truck, or if there's a supervisor, or if you're doing work on the farm that they thought was construction, they would apply a different code to it for non-ag, and they would use surveys from people that were not farms. So they would use a survey where they'd never ask farms because USDA already did that. They didn't want to step on their toes. So they would check on that. And so there were a lot of jobs where it jumped up. So people that had drivers in particular, or if you had bus drivers on the farm, move workers from the housing to the field, that now may be another code. And that's going to be, instead of a $12 or $13 an hour job, all of a sudden it's a $20 an hour job. And so we filed the lawsuit on that. There were a couple others, one in Louisiana and one in North Carolina. And we're able to get pieces of it blocked, but not really, but it was coming to a head where we're going to have oral argument on that, and the administration said, we can't defend this. We don't want to fight this, so we're going to take a knee, and they entered a consent judgment in the case and said, we're killing the 2023 rule, and so they had to issue a new rule because they're required to have a new wage every year, and USDA at the same time had said, oh, by the way, we're not going to do our survey. So the way that you've been setting wages for the last 40 years, we're not doing that anymore. You're on your own. So they came up with a totally new wage. Instead of grouping states together like they used to do, I think South Carolina, Georgia, and Alabama were one wage. Florida had their own. North Carolina, Virginia were clustered together. There were groups of 6 states, 2 states kind of put together. Each state has their own, and it uses this Bureau of Labor Statistics information. They say that most of the jobs are going to be in kind of an average group of that kind of core group of farm worker, ag equipment operator, grader sorter packer. That's going to be 90% of the jobs they estimate. And so those are all going to be put together. And so each state will have their own average. So that's kind of step one. They go to that data. Then within that, there's still going to be some other occupations. They estimate that's going to be fairly rare. They've changed how they define whether you're in the Big Five or outside the Big Five, because again, by definition, these guys are working on farms or they wouldn't be able to get here. To be H-2A, it has to be ag. You can't have people that are driving trucks for Amazon as an H-2A driver. It doesn't happen. And so there are still some codes, and we'll show what that looks like in a minute. And so once that's set, you have the occupation, kind of, okay, you're a Big Five, and it doesn't matter as between them, a farm worker, a grader, sorter packer, ag equipment, whatever that is, those are all within that Big Five. Within that, they will apply what they call a skill level test. So they look at whether is it an experienced job or really an entry level job. Why are we paying everybody as though they're above average? Like every single person that walks onto the farm all of a sudden is getting kind of they're paid in the top half of all wages for the whole industry. That doesn't make sense. They just started that day. So basically they look at what experience do you need to start the job. It doesn't matter that you have people that have come back for 5 years, 10 years. It's sort of what would the next person up need to have to get into that job. If they can do the job with a month or two of experience, that's fine. That's considered an entry-level job no matter how long you do it. And so it's going to take different chunks of that wage rate. For that state, it's either going to be at the middle point for the experienced job. That's kind of how they were doing it under the 23 rule, or at the kind of halfway point of the bottom third, where they average together, some of the lower wages. And it's about a $3 to5 an hour difference in most places. And so again, it's looking at kind of what's the minimum you need just to start. And so the average is about 2.5 months. And so they estimate that 92% of jobs are going to be at the skill 1 level. So that's a further adjustment that helps us. This is some of the language they have. This isn't going to be on the quiz, don't worry. And so basically it's kind of the idea of entry level, that it's sort of up to 2 months usually works. There's some jobs that are getting through at 3 months as a skill 1 job. There are even some driving jobs that are skill 1, even though obviously you need a CDL, so you would have been driving for a certain amount of time to get that. But if you've only been a CDL driver for a month, that's fine. If it's somebody that you would hire. If it turns out that everybody on your payroll has 5 years of experience, it doesn't matter. It's sort of, the idea is kind of, if somebody came to you, the U.S. worker said, I've done the job for 3 months, will you hire me? You'd say, yes, I will. There you go. Like that's, kind of where is that line? So 2 months and under is generally skill 1. And then the language they use here, sort of they have specific skills, training, 3 months plus is probably going to be skill 2. So it's somewhere in there. And then after that is done, there's more math than you need to do on a Saturday morning, I'm sorry. And so they take that and then they adjust those wages down. For the H-2A workers, because they realize, this is something that we argued in the lawsuit, you're trying to compare apples to apples of kind of, well, what are U.S. workers paid and what are H-2A workers paid? You don't want to pay the foreign worker less than the U.S. because that's going to hurt the U.S. workers' wages. Well, that's fine, but when you pay a U.S. worker, they take that money, they go pay rent, they go pay their mortgage. The H-2A worker, they get the exact same money. They don't have to pay anything. You're giving them free housing. And so you're actually overpaying. So they've tilted the playing field that way. And so they realized, oh, yeah, we've been doing that wrong for a long time. So if you have H-2A workers, we're going to essentially give you credit for what you're also doing on top of the wages. And so that's what they call an adverse compensation adjustment. It's like a lot of syllables for basically kind of they just adjust the wage down. It's not a housing credit because it's not a one-for-one thing, and it's not related to what you actually pay. It's an average for kind of what housing looks like in your state. And essentially kind of, so all H-2A workers would have that adjusted down, whether they choose to live in the housing or have family in the area. If you have U.S. workers, if they've hired in from another state, like you have workers that came from Texas to come pick for you in Georgia, that you would give them housing, but they would still get the full value of the wage. So it's essentially tied to their status. They're going to change this. Instead of, they used to do it on a calendar year basis, we'd get new wages around Christmas time. Now they're going to do it mid-year, just because that's when the Department of Labor puts out their data. So the wages that you're seeing now have been in effect since last June. That tells you what the front half of the season is going to be. We don't know what it's going to look like for harvest, for the back half of the season, unfortunately. And so could go up, it could go down. If the wage goes down in the middle of the season, you're stuck with the wage you started at. If it goes up, you have to catch up to that. But it's both kind of whether we think wages will go up, but also whether housing costs will go up and which will go up faster. Because if the wage goes up $2, but the housing cost goes down $2.50, you're going to end up with a net lower wage for the H-2As. And so again, this is the data source because USDA always was doing surveys for farms. they never have here. They're going to start looking at farms. It's going to take a while for that to be built in because it's a 3-year rolling average, so it shouldn't spike up and down as quickly. We were seeing double-digit changes, 1 year's this and then 12% higher next year. It should kind of level that out a little bit. Yeah.
On Florida, with the minimum wage goes from 14 to 15.
Yeah.
You can't take the ACA, right?
It doesn't.
Still gotta be that.
Exactly right. And so here you'll see, so for Florida, the adjusted wages are $10.18 and $12.17. And so at $14, that's higher. And so you have to pay the highest applicable wage. So for years, the wages the DOL set were so far above the state minimum that nobody ever knew. I couldn't have told you a single state minimum wage, but now you have to pay attention to all of those different ones. So where that's higher, that wins. You don't then adjust the minimum. You can never go below that. That's kind of a concrete floor. But for a lot of these jobs, for a lot of states, it's $7.25, so it's kind of a non-issue. Virginia's talking about, they have a minimum wage, but it doesn't apply to ag workers. There was a bill last year to do that. There's a new governor this year, so they might get that through. So if you know folks in Virginia, that may change. But this red column in the middle, that's that adjustment. So that's actually a minus number that comes off the U.S. wages. So you'll see what the old AWARE was on the red column toward the left side. That's where we were as of last year before the rule kicked in. So a lot of $16, $17 an hour wage. Now we're looking at, Louisiana's down to $8. You got some $10 H-2A wages there. So real savings. So the estimate from the department when they put this out was that farms would save $2.4 billion every year. So it's going to be a $24 billion saving over the 10 years that they were calculating. So money that would have been paid out in wages that you get to hang on to.
$4 billion savings in the next 10 years.
Yeah. So, a billion here, a billion there. After a while, we're talking about real money. So it's not bad. And so these are for some of those other occupations. If you have jobs that don't fall into that, and again, they think that 9 times out of 10, you're going to be in the big 5. And before, if you had any, a toe on the line, it was going to consider that outside. Somebody that picks strawberries for you all day, but they drive the bus in the morning to get the guys there. He was going to be a bus driver, and everybody on the contract became a bus driver. Now they're saying, well, mostly what you do is pick strawberries. You may drive a bus every once in a while, but that's not your main job. We're going to pay you as a farm worker. And so, but to the extent you have people that are all the time supervisors or all the time truck drivers, these are what the wages will look like in Georgia under the new rule, again, from now until June. You still have that adjustment. So there's some, if you're a shuttle driver wage, that's actually lower for some of these on the entry-level job than it would be for a farm worker. So having somebody be a bus driver may not be the worst thing. And then they can still have those other duties, but, it's a few cents an hour. It's not a big deal, but you see how a lot of these got closer, but the supervisor wage is still quite a lot higher. If you have and typically if you're a supervisor, you will have done that for more than 2 months. You're rarely you're a first timer, but I feel like I could boss people around. So all of a sudden, that's either going to be $35 or $33. That's a good chunk of money. So you can be kind of a very experienced farm worker, and there are a lot of things they can do of keep track of reports, watch things. But if they do safety training or they have the ability to discipline or fire people, there's certain things that will trigger that supervisor code. Okay, and then just looking forward, these are some of the things that kind of working with the coalition we're able to get done, kind of get rid of some of the bad rules, kind of introduce a new one that's good. And so we are kind of switching from offense to defense on the AWARE rule. So the rule is out there, and now the worker unions on the West Coast don't like it and are suing in Fresno to try to block that. So there are groups that are kind of pulling together to help defend the rule, kind of be shoulder to shoulder with the department and kind of work with their lawyers to defend the rule in court out there. The cases where we'd been challenging it are winding down. And those are specifically about some of the truck driver wages. So it changed, but it didn't really change for some of the truck drivers. So they're folks that are affected by that. And just some of the efforts that have been ongoing. Just keep an eye on what the agencies are doing, submitting FOIA requests. There's the Freedom of Information Act. You're able to request documents. They have to produce it to you, so find out what they're doing. How are you calculating it? That's partly what drove it, is that questions from the coalition about how are you setting the wages? Where did you get this? Why are the wages going down here where you say you had better responses, and why not here where we don't? maybe you should be doing a better job of it. And so kind of getting that information to use that to push that, hiring economists to figure out that the AWAR was actually pulling up on U.S. wages. It wasn't that it was keeping up with kind of a natural growth in U.S. wages. Because of how the department was setting it and doing the survey wrong, it was actually lifting everybody up. And so that was a pull factor. And then just going forward for advocacy, just trying to get this locked in. It was a long time ago, so you may not remember, but at the end of the Bush administration, they had a similar rule. This was the beginning of 2009. They had a rule that was going to change the wages. It was on the books for about 6 weeks. Obama team came in, tore it up. And so kind of as soon as it changes, nobody knows what's going to happen in 2028 with the new election. But if we can get Congress to do it, they haven't really changed the statute since '86. So it's a whole lot harder to get them to do anything, but it's a lot harder to change it too. So if we can get some of those positive things built into the law, that will protect it. And then just ongoing ways to make the program work better. So people that already use it, streamline it. And so there are some changes to how USCIS processes the applications. Now, it used to be you'd have to wait, you get a paper copy of your labor cert, you stick it in an envelope, you mail it to someplace out west, then Homeland Security says, yep, that looks good, or we have a problem, they mail you back a letter, you respond, you write it down, you mail it back to them. This is like Ben Franklin writing to Thomas Jefferson kind of stuff. And it's just like, now it all happens electronically. And so as soon as it's lodged at DOL, they send you a notice of acceptance, boom, you're on a parallel track, they talk to each other, they figure it out, you get your labor cert, you get your visa petition approved same day, you're ready to go. There's some hiccups with that, and we're working on some of the processing things at the consulates to make sure that's all moving well. It's at the same time that all the security concerns they were talking about are going on. So there's an announcement yesterday kind of on the way down about drivers will have to produce a copy of their criminal record from each state that they drove in when they go to the consulate now. Kind of additional requirements for vetting are in place now. So, heads up on some of those changes. So there's some tension of kind of wanting to work with farmers, but also wanting to keep the country safe. Those are sometimes at odds with each other. But also just expanding access to the program. Being in a state where it's 75 in February or in January, you can grow things a lot longer than people in Michigan can. And so being able to have kind of longer seasons. So be able to have greenhouses in, have dairies use the program, folks that want to run on a non-seasonal basis. That's something that they would have to fix in Congress that we're working on to try to expand who can use the program. And that is it. Okay.
Fireside?
Go for it, yeah.
Pile of questions for you.
All right, good.
All right. On the new AWAR and the methodology and the new survey and the way that's going to work, Chris knows one of the things that we tried to do for years was get an understanding of how they were coming up with that wage. We did the Freedom of Information request and we never got an answer. Do we feel now, and we're not mathematicians, but is there somebody that knows that will be able to look at that formula and be able to have some certainty about what wages are and maybe some predictability?
Some. There should be a little more predictability because it's that 3-year rolling average, so it shouldn't bounce around quite as quickly as it used to. When we've looked at how they average the numbers for those 5 occupations, it never quite adds up to the right amount, so I'm not sure if they're doing some weighting, so we could ask them how they do that. USDA had put out some information, but it was essentially useless. So this is DOL, so it's a totally different agency that might be able to answer that for us. Okay. Part of it is that the packer category. So not somebody's grading kind of like, these are good carrots, bad carrots, but kind of just packing things. That's by far the biggest response rate out of the 5. Because it doesn't include farms. It's not people that are like kind of packing peaches into a box to go off to the Kroger's. It's people working in an Amazon warehouse. It's people that are putting, batteries in a box or packing teddy bears or something like that. Like that's mostly who's responding to that. So it skews it a little bit. The good news is that tends to be the lowest wage out of the 5. So we don't want to complain too much about that because it's a good outcome. But that's, it's sort of how they do that. We can kind of get, kind of look under the hood about how they calculate it a little bit, and having them actually ask farms, what do you pay, I think will be helpful.
Okay. It was, as Chris knows, and I think I'm preaching to the choir, but we had the 3 years of double-digit increases here, and just having the uncertainty that brought to operations, aside from the fact that it was unsustainable, but not knowing, I think, was as bad as anything else. You mentioned at the very end the new rule asking for the criminal background checks, and I believe the way it was worded was in each state that person has been in for 3 months or longer.
I think that's right, yeah.
Is that the states here where they've worked, or the states at home where they're from?
I think it's here, and I think, we're not sure. This is what's one thing we're checking on right now, is that it's not even a rule, it's just something that, it was an email that came out of the U.S. consulates in Mexico. So if you have workers that come in through Tijuana or Monterrey or, Laredo, like, that's something that they're looking at there. And they, it seemed to be tied to drivers because there's been a concern about drivers coming in being dangerous. And so it was really about kind of give us a copy of your driving record in Mexico. And it refers specifically to that 53, 30, 32 kind of semi-driver code. So I don't think it's everybody that comes in that's going to be kind of hand harvesting has to come up with that record because they already have access to the National Criminal Database at the desk at the State Department. So they're doing their vetting on the front end there. I think it's tied to drivers, but we'll know better hopefully by next week.
Okay, and there's certainly been in the news a lot about drivers from other countries that weren't qualified or didn't have the right license and accidents. So, okay. Let's go back to AWARE and the new classes of skill levels. To me, it's a little nebulous in the way they've written it, and that can be good or bad. But do we expect DOL to kick back applications in the beginning? And can we learn from it if they do, based on how people are plugging their workers into those skill levels? Is there going to be a learning curve for everybody?
There will, kind of including on the side, on the DOL side and on the state workforce agency. Kind of when you submit the application, Georgia SWA was doing a pretty good job. There were some that said if you require literally any experience, you must have done this, worked on a farm for a day, experience job, plus $5. And so they had to go back and explain to them, no, that's not what we said. You got to read the whole rule. Experience means this, So there's going to be a little bit of that as we see what works. Kind of we're coming in the spring season, so a lot of people are filing now. So we're going to know a lot more about it as we go. That seems to work. The 2 months, 3 months is about right. There's some that are lower where they're saying we think it's more experienced. Some that are higher that are getting through as a skill one. It's about what they estimated, 92% is skill one. That's about right. So most of these jobs are things you could do, pretty much kind of show up and do.
Okay. It'll be interesting to watch how that develops. Housing, one of the things we hear all the time, it's a little bit easier now that we have the adjustment, but housing, food, all the other expenses that I believe are unique to the H-2A visa program. So all the other visa programs that are out there are not having to pay those expenses. Are you sensing a willingness from the administration to at least consider that and take into consideration that, it's not just the hourly wage that we're paying?
Yeah, that's, so H-2B, if you brought workers in to do, like to process some other farm's fruit, so that it's not 50% your own, so it's considered non-ag, so food processing or seafood or landscaping, they pay them their wage, they go find their own housing, good luck. You don't have to provide, that's a unique creation of H-2A. The way the statute was worded in 86 was that employers must provide. It doesn't say it has to be free, just that you would provide. And so there was language in the proposed rule asking for comments of kind of like, should we even still be requiring this? What if you just paid workers, they found their own housing, or you worked out a stipend or some kind of offset so that you'd help them find housing? So we'll see what they end up doing when the final rule comes out sometime this year. But there is consideration of that. The other thing on the meals, there's some, like if people are staying in hotels or places that don't have kitchens, they have to provide a caterer and like certain meals. And we've had somebody yesterday where the state was saying, well, the lunch menu sounds too much like the dinner menu. I think they'll get bored by that. Or like, you can't just have sandwiches for lunch. It's like, that's what people have for lunch. That's not, we're kind of like, they won't like that. That's not tasty enough. And so they're like, this is dumb. We're farmers. We're not landlords. We're not caterers. We shouldn't be in that business. And so basically just say like, give them money. And so especially if they're traveling around, they'd go buy food. If you're on the road, you just get what you want. Find ways to kind of make the program more flexible.
Okay. Last one, then maybe we'll have a couple of minutes for questions from the audience. But the coalition that I mentioned, GFGA and North Carolina Sweet Potato Growers Association founded that coalition, and it's grown now, like I said, 38 organizations across 8 states, and we are solely focused on AWARE. So our thing is, all right, we've gotten the rates adjusted now. Let's really lean on Congress to codify that. The next thing we'll do is actually another PR campaign starting in February, letters to the editor and all that. Is that doing any good? Is that helping when we keep it in keep it in the news.
It is. I mean, this administration, more than probably any other we've ever had, is in tune with social media things. You know, kind of things that people are talking about, they're listening to that. That kind of as things go viral or kind of people are talking about it, they get that and say like, oh, our farms are suffering, and kind of lowering wages. That's a way to lower the prices of food at the grocery store. That's a thing we campaign on. That's something we want to do. So kind of connecting the dots on things like that, or even what they're talking about at the panel before, enforcing for the people that aren't playing by the rules means that it creates a level playing field for us. That if they are just sort of, they're not really into farming, they're drug dealers, they don't have to pay very well. Like they can, you know, produce a bushel for half as much as you because they don't care. So kind of all these things kind of go hand in hand of making, you know, farming better, making food cheaper, you know, just sort of making the country stronger. Like that's the kind of message that they're responding to. And so in Congress, they've not been very busy. You know, that's sort of historically low. That's the nicest thing you could say about Congress, sorry. You know, but they, and which sometimes is good because a lot of the things they do are not things we like, but kind of this is something where they really could help us. And so there's some proposed bills that are being written up now that should be introduced soon. And so kind of reaching out to your members to support that. A lot of these are bipartisan issues, so kind of like food safety, food security, you know, affordability. Everybody likes that. So figuring out how to get that done is something that's going to occupy most of the next 6 months for us.
Yep. The bills you mentioned, Chairman G.T. Thompson had, and repeating myself for people that have been in other sessions, but Chairman G.T. Thompson had a task force last year that looked at and provided a report on how to improve the H-2A program. A lot of the recommendations that are in there were taken verbatim from recommendations that we had made. So we're eagerly awaiting seeing that bill drop, and I believe it may be pretty soon, is what I've heard. And that'll definitely be something that the coalition and other groups can support. So it'll be the first time in a long time that we've had any reform since, as you mentioned, since 1986. So, all right, we'll see if we have any questions from the audience. Let me repeat the question so we get it for the recording. The question was, do we expect any possibility of going year-round with workers as opposed to the 10-month?
That's one of the proposals that had been in that the kind of the coalition group that he'd put together. We think it's likely. The issue is kind of how they do that. So there are two things, kind of when we message that and kind of when we talk about it. For some reason, year-round is kind of people are allergic to that, so we say non-seasonal. It's like how people aren't illegal workers; they're document challenged. Sort of, there's like a more polite term for it. Anyways, but so I think there is because there's a lot of push from dairy and some of the kind of controlled environment ag. The greenhouse operators want to be able to access it, and they've been on the outside looking in. So people in dairy, the people in the livestock industry say they do have an H-2A program. It's ours. Like we bring in workers the right way, and then they poach them away from us and work illegally. But whatever. But there is an idea that they need to expand that. It's just a question of how. Because if they open it up to everybody, the dairies were concerned that everybody would kind of go immediately to year-round farms. And so they wanted a certain set aside for them. Or there was a concern that it would just be, you know, kind of not green card people, but they would come in and just kind of work for a long time and the numbers would skyrocket. And so that might be capped for a period of time, but the way it's set up is that if we hit the cap, it would automatically expand, so it's not really a cap. And so it got into the details of that. But the support for there being kind of ag that can happen year-round is very much there. It's just a question of what that looks like in the final text.
Yeah, and that was one of our recommendations, just because as our farms become larger and more diverse, you're working 12 months a year. You know, you need people 12 months a year. So it is not a seasonal need anymore.
Yeah, they
say that's likely. They is USDOL, the labor secretary,
through Congress. Yeah, DOL will say that we're not allowed to kind of, when Congress did it in 86, they said seasonal. They've interpreted seasonal to mean 10 months. But so to go from 10 to 12, they're saying Congress has to do that. We can't. And so, but we think they probably will. That's something we expect in the Thompson bill.
And when that bill is released, what the coalition is really good at is making noise and picking up press. But we need our members, and you'll see if that bill comes out, you'll see organizations, you know, put it out and say, please contact your representatives. That will become really important at that point to let them know that you're supportive of that.
What's the timeline of that look like?
It's been a few weeks away for a few months, so a few weeks away.
Yeah, that one's.
Yeah, exactly. We're hoping by, I don't know, by the end of February, I would hope. So it should be ready, but there's always that behind the scenes thing. They tend not to change as much when they're out. They don't kind of put it out and say, hey, what do y'all think about that? It's like, this is the bill, your choices are take it or, get lost. So it's sort of, they want to get it right on the front.
I want to get it right on the front. According to that one, I have to go through the Judiciary Committee, which is foreign territory for us, so to speak. So there's a lot there with Jim Jordan wanting to do his larger immigration bill. We got to see where we fit in with that, or maybe we're separate from that. So I think they're trying to see how that all plays out too.
But they tied it before to mandatory E-Verify, which, kind of we're used to that. That's not as big a deal here as it would be in other states. And kind of adjustment of status for people that are already here. So if there are illegal workers, they could kind of pay a fine, show that they've worked in ag for a while, and then kind of get back into having a green card or be able to leave and come back as H-2A. So kind of the more moving pieces there are, the more people that'll be ticked off by it. But if we can do just sort of, we just want to clean up this program, that makes it a little bit lighter to move. So, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, just touching on the driving, it seems my understanding is they've relaxed everything else, but then they've cracked down on driving, obviously, because of situations in Florida, things like that.
Yeah.
Is that applicable to any worker who gets behind the wheel? Or are they looking at more CDL or guys doing shuttle buses? Like if you have a guy driving a half-ton pickup truck with 2 other workers, are they looking at him the same as they're looking at somebody driving a school bus full of other workers? And is the consulate still doing the same checks regardless? Or like, is it, if you get behind the wheel, are you under these guidelines, or is it kind of a sliding scale based on your behavior?
The question goes to drivers again, and are the rules applied equally to everyone, regardless of where they're driving, or if you're driving 2 or 3 people, or is that looked at differently than if you're driving a bus?
It's a good question, and I had somebody call me at the airport yesterday asking that because they had workers going to the consulate on Monday, and they were trying to figure out if they need to pull criminal background checks or something for them. I think not. I think it's if the job requires a CDL. There are jobs where you don't have to, but we'll help you get a CDL, things like, but I think farm truck driving, they treat differently, kind of under that 26,000 pound gross vehicle weight is different. They tend to be coding more of these jobs as ag equipment operator, farm worker for the smaller trucks, so that makes sense. Or if you're operating within 150 air miles of where you are, there's exemptions for the CDL and some of the hours of service rules. So far, it looks to be kind of, we're talking heavy trucks that are going over highways. That's who they're really targeting with this. But again, there's no history to it or notice and comment. It was just sort of like, hey, everybody, bring these extra documents to the consulate. And so we don't know. And so trying to find people at the State Department on a Friday afternoon and try to ask was trickier than, well, it's as tricky as you would think. Yeah, never mind. It's not a surprise. But so just trying to track down what they mean by that. But the target for a lot of this, because there's a while where they said, we're not going to give visas to anybody who could come in as a CDL. Okay, well, then they walked it back. Well, actually, if you're an H-2A, that makes sense. Kind of we do still need to get things from the farm to markets. So there's an exception for that. Okay, well, you have to be English proficient to be able to get behind the wheel. So we've had some of the consulates testing that, talking to the workers when they come to the window and saying, I don't think your English is good enough to be a driver. I'm going to deny your visa. So we've had pushback on that. And so that kind of CDL driver has been kind of the tip of the spear on a lot of the pushback to the program. They're generally favorable to the program, but it's kind of where you get competing things. Like we like farms, but we don't like foreign drivers on the road. Well, the two have to go together because otherwise we're gardeners and not farmers. If we can't get it out and sell it, we're just making a pretty thing and then throwing it in a pile to rot. So we need to have this work, but that's that tension of kind of finding, safety plus productivity all in one. Yeah.
Last thing I'll say is when the new rule came out, I believe it was a Friday, wasn't it, this year?
Yeah.
Late in the afternoon. So I emailed Chris. I was up, it was like 11:30 on Friday night, just thinking it was the last thing I was doing before I was going to bed, thinking I'd hear from him the next day. I heard back from him that night because he was sitting there reading this 60-page rule. Was it that it? Or was it 120?
That was
120
yeah.
On Friday night and over the weekend. So he has provided GFEGA with a really good summary of the rule. So if anybody's interested in that, you can go back and check our previous e-blast. But if you'd like to get a copy of it too, shoot me a note and I'll get you a copy of that. So we're just really, really appreciative of the work that Chris does at Fisher Phillips and that Chris does with us, trying to level the playing field and bring back some sanity to the H-2A program. So thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.
Okay, we'll now turn to we'll transition to the next part of our program. We're going to move from labor to trade. And please join me in welcoming Mr. Bob Redding. He is president of the Redding Firm. He's going to discuss Southeastern produce trade updates. And Bob, bear with me. I'll grab your slides here.
Thanks for the, I need the tutorial. Thanks, Carla. And thanks to Carla for always being available to testify in Washington, too. I really appreciate that. And I know a number of you have helped us on a number of our issues, the Ag committees and other committees, so really appreciate that. Thanks for letting me participate today. It's really been a good show. I've learned a lot from sessions that I didn't necessarily speak at, but I have learned a lot. For today, I'm going to briefly touch on these issues, why we're talking about this, administration's role, and particularly the next rest of 2026, Congress's role. We're going to talk about U.S., Mexico, Canada agreement review that's coming up beginning July 1, and next steps for fruit and vegetable growers that have a stake in this and are interested in resolving our import issues. First, what's the issue? Imports we've seen since 2001 of 550% increase in citrus and vegetables into the U.S. from Mexico. And in addition, much of this is supported by less regulatory requirements in Mexico and some other countries, lower cost of production, and certainly lower labor cost. This has been a much talked about for us for several years. About a year ago, the Georgia Fruit and Vegetable Association and other groups started working on how we're going to address USMCA review. A little bit of history here. Land-grant universities, many in the Southeast, state departments of agriculture, other studies, private sector studies, hired studies, for-profit entity studies have all shown that we have a significant price issue relative to these imports. The blueberry industry and the fruit and vegetable industries in the Southeast encouraged U.S. Trade Rep, U.S. Department of Commerce, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture to have hearings in Georgia and Florida in 2020 relative to the import problem. There were two hearings, one in Georgia and one in Florida, that led to a Section 201 blueberry request investigation by the International Trade Commission, and later a Section 332 investigation for cucumbers and squash. Both of those investigations indicated there was a significant problem. This was certainly emphasized in the cucumber and squash piece. Blueberry, during the hearings, appeared to be our strongest case for resolving the import issue. But these are investigations or recommendations to the White House. The President still makes the final decision. Between the investigation and the ITC vote on blueberry, we had the general election, the Trump 1.0 we started, and then the election happened, and it was clear that the Biden administration was not going to be supportive of our efforts. And this is played out in the next bullet I'm going to talk about here. But this was a big deal for us. If the election had gone the other way, whatever your politics, we think the ITC decision would have been different, and pretty confident the White House decision would have been different. During the Biden administration, we were still pushing for Ambassador Tai, who was the U.S. Trade Rep, to do something about the import problem. Senator Rubio, now Secretary of State Rubio, encouraged USTR to establish a seasonal and perishable ag products advisory committee. Initially, it was just Florida members. We were able to get a Georgia Fruit and Vegetable Grower Association board member, Chris Butts, and also the MBG Blueberry Co-op out of Michigan also had a slot. Unfortunately, even after approval of all the board members and support by many members of Congress, during the Biden administration, the committee never met. This is a federal advisory committee. Their decisions, their recommendations are not binding on anyone, But the goal was to tee up the USMCA review with a positive report from our position that we have a problem and we need it resolved in USMCA, in the USMCA review, did not happen. That was big for us. We got what we asked for, but the previous administration never asked them to meet. Federal ag import legislation, over the last few years, we've had seasonal import legislation that we've supported. Congressman Austin Scott from Georgia and Congressman Ruiz, Democrat from California, introduced legislation that would pay growers that have been impacted on price by seasonal imports. It didn't take off. Senator Ossoff of Georgia introduced a bill in the Senate, supported by several other members, both parties. Sanford Bishop introduced another bill in the House later on in the last Congress that would do the same thing, a little different structure and payment process, but would do the same thing. Part of the reason these bills did not get legs had to do with not of opposition so much from outside ag groups or importers, but opposition within the various specialty crop groups that, one, did not want legislation, or number two, wanted a different process for addressing this issue, which is unfortunate. Okay, if we'll look at this has all changed a little bit. I remember the first meeting when during Trump 1.0, the head of economic advisors for the president called in all the ag commodity groups, and we met and went around the room talking about the roles of various entities in trade. And after hearing our different positions on what we wanted, the head then of the economic advisors to the president said that the two entities or three entities for agriculture leading on trade would be U.S. Trade Rep, U.S. Department of Agriculture, and the U.S. Department of Commerce, which that's the first time, even though we have the International Trade Administration at Commerce, never been point on these major negotiations with other countries. It's always been USTR. This was a difficult pill for many in the career staff to swallow in the beginning, that Commerce would have an outsized role in the negotiations, but that did occur as we move forward. Commerce still has a role. Now Treasury has a role, and certainly USDA over the years, advisory role with Foreign Ag Service, Economic Research Service, NASS, that provides a lot of the data, and AMS in our space. One thing I wanted to note at U.S. Trade Rep now, Jameson Greer, was part of the legal team that represented blueberry and the American Blueberry Growers Alliance during the period of the blueberry case. He was chief of staff for Trump 1.1 at the U.S. Trade Rep's office for Bob Lighthizer. Lighthizer, if you are confused by the tariffs, if you're confused by a lot of the strategy at USTR on agriculture and trade, and as a precursor for what we're seeing leading up to the USMCA review, I encourage you to read his book. It is not, I mentioned yesterday, bedtime reading. It's pretty slow, but it does lay out how President Trump has been talking about this before he entered politics, Lighthizer's position on this, which is teed up or cued the current USTR and how they're addressing a lot of the agricultural issues. But his book, No Trade is Free, is a good read. It will, if you make your money in production agriculture and the trade issue is important to you, take a look at this. It'll give you a little more confidence that there's a plan. And that this is not about having all these tariffs and creating loopholes. There is a strategy here, and if you read that book, you'll understand it a little better. So I encourage you to take a look at it. Congress's role. Congress's role is a little unique with this review, since we're kind of doing this the first time. This is a 16-year agreement. In year 6, the agreement called for a review, which begins technically or formally in July 1 of this year. This is something, as I mentioned, a lot of our groups that are really involved in this, concerned about seasonal imports, have been involved in this for over a year. In early meetings last spring with the top U.S. Trade Rep office political appointees, It was encouraging to know that they had already created a USMCA review team, okay? It was also encouraging to know from a position perspective, they were already where we are. They were already where we are with concerned about these imports and quite knowledgeable. Even at the political level, the career staff dealt with this for a number of years and heard from us even during the Biden administration. But they were very familiar with it and, frankly, on the right side of this. Congress's role, we have two committees really that focus on this, House Ways and Means Trade Subcommittee and the Senate Finance Committee Trade Subcommittee. From our perspective, Jason Smith, who's very close to the President, chairs the Ways and Means Committees from Missouri, but he represents an ag space. He's all about agriculture. He likes USMCA, but is sympathetic to the experiences that we've had in particularly the Southeast relative to seasonal imports. We have some members on this committee. It's heavy on the Florida piece. Greg Stubbe is a leader on the subcommittee. He's from more central Florida, Gulf area, but Greg has been on the committee. He's on the trade subcommittee too, but has been very helpful to us. Congressman Vern Buchanan from Florida is also helpful. We have Terry Sewell from Alabama on the Democratic side, and Suzanne DelBene from Washington State. You might not think would be a key player on this, but she's had at one time all of the red raspberries in Washington State in her district, so she's been very supportive of the red raspberry industry. So we do have a small coalition in the House. The Senate, we have several members that have been helpful to us, not as strong there, and we have another member in the House, Greg Murphy of North Carolina, that's helpful. In the Senate, Cornyn of Texas, who's in a tough primary, is chairman of the Trade Subcommittee, but the ranking Democrat on the subcommittee is Raphael Warnock of Georgia. Senator Warnock has been helpful to us, particularly in these early confirmation hearings for Greer and for Dr. Julie Callahan, who is the Deputy for Agriculture. And as Chris Butts knows, that we've worked with Senator Warnock and also Marie Cantwell of Washington State, ranking Democrat on the committee, and getting questions into these members during the process about seasonal imports. The readout on those, the records of those, whether they were public questions or follow-up questions for the record, the answers were very encouraging. In the most recent private meeting with the committee, where there was a readout of the Q&A with U.S. Trade Rep Jameson Greer, he was very clear about his position on seasonal imports and that we needed to resolve it. So the positions going into the discussions in July, we like where we are. But there's more in a minute I'm going to talk about that we need to address. Timeline, as I mentioned earlier, the original agreement was signed January 29th, 2020. July 1st, 2026 is when the joint review kicks off. The agreement terminates July 1, 2036 if something doesn't happen during the review. So these next 6 months to 10 months are going to be critical from our perspective about communicating with Congress and encourage them to talk to the U.S. Trade Rep as well as the President and the President's team. We've already been meeting with staff at both the White House and U.S. Trade Rep's office. USDA is quite familiar with this. But we're going to need to keep a lot of information and education going over the next few months. We've had a comment period that ended November 3rd. Georgia Fruit and Vegetable and all the groups that have skin in the game here submitted comments for our position. There were formal hearings, 3 days of formal hearings, and they selected, because this is for all industry sectors, not just agriculture, 3 days of hearings and key testimony to review, and we can get this to you if you're interested in it, were the Florida Fruit and Vegetable Growers Association. They were spot on exactly where we are. Red raspberry, which has a little more unique issue. They're a year-round problem. Pecan has a year-round problem. Pecan's position, national position, has been the same as Georgia Fruit and Vegetable, and there are others that fall in that category. Michigan asparagus, as well as other people that have been supportive of us in the past and signed on letters. Certainly, American and Georgia Farm Bureau, other Farm Bureau, state Farm Bureaus have been solid on this and had this position, seasonal import, addressing it in their annual issue positions. So those are items that are going to be important in this process. You take a look at some of the comments that were made. This is from the formal comments that Georgia Fruit and Vegetable Growers submitted, but the messaging was all the same, focusing on it's killing our industry, it's not resolved yet, Congress has not addressed it. There's a lot of support in Congress for it, but Congress has not addressed it. And the hearing, the same thing from the testimony I mentioned earlier, Raspberry and Florida Fruit and Vegetable, and there were others. The bulk of agriculture, as you might imagine, supports USMCA, but we have not had a strong pushback outside of specialty crops on our position. Now, frankly, we have some in specialty crops that don't like our position, and this has created a lot of problems for us, particularly in the Congress. But we believe the administration will skew toward our position moving forward. Agricultural groups have signed on hundreds to letters supporting USMCA, but those letters don't do anything to harm us. We see this as a narrow area that needs to be addressed in discussions as USMCA moves forward. So we want to keep that position. Next steps, the policy message being a little more flexible than we've been in the past. Certainly tariffs have been quite popular, but in our messaging and our written comments and in public comments have certainly encouraged flexibility with the U.S. Trade Rep, whatever they think will work as these negotiations move forward after July 1. We want to encourage them to fix the problem, and we'll need to be flexible in how they address it. What can you do to help? In the next 30 to 60 days, we'll start a pretty significant campaign within the Congress to get key members of Congress from our side to start working the administration saying, we need to bring this home. We know you support us, but we'll be encouraging them to stick. I know we're getting close to time here, but any questions, I'll be glad to try and answer them. Comments? Yes, sir. We've not had strong support from some of the California groups, right, Chris? And I'm being generous here, but it's not been a lot of help. And one of the things that happens with something like this, we want this fixed, and a number of ag specialty crop groups will lowball us. They'll come in with a cure that does not fix it. And that always hurts, particularly members of Congress. Many members of Congress, some would say all, they're going to take the one that's less painful. And there's certainly a less painful role to do this through some type of crop insurance cure, for example, risk management cure, versus what we're talking about here, which is, whether it's a tariff or a quota or some type of resolution in a window of time when we're marketing. But we've got a number of commodities, but when you start writing down the commodities that are impacted here, it's not a great number. This doesn't have to be a headline kind of action. The commodities that are interested in this have been very clear in those comments. We need to stick with that and be flexible on the cure.
Can I answer that a little less?
Yes. Yes.
Bob was really kind there. We tried for 3 years in the Specialty Crop Farm Bill Alliance to get some. Sorry, Bill. We tried. Check. There we go. We tried for about 3 years to get the Specialty Crop Farm Bill Alliance to align with our position here. Who is that made up of? That's made up of groups like IFPA, Western Growers, and frankly, they have year-round interests that differ from ours. And so to Bob's point, it's not so much that they've opposed us, but they don't come out and support us. And that's evident when that happens and we walk into the room and say, hey, we've got a problem with trade. And they say, well, why aren't we hearing from IFPA?
Is it bigger?
Thank you. So I'm not as familiar with like the other specialty crops, but what exactly is it that they're against, or like are the interests opposing? Is something in what you're proposing actually going to hurt them?
I would suggest that absolutely not. It would not hurt them. What we initially tried to take to the Specialty Crop Farm Bill Alliance was, can I call it something akin to a PLC plan?
Yeah.
It would have set market prices for certain commodities, and if sales prices drop below that, then those growers would be eligible for a payment from USDA to help make up that difference. It was one solution that we suggested to level that playing field. The problem is, and we've got data that supports all this, when those products are coming in on top of our regular marketing seasons, cucumbers, for example, I've got a stat, it was 67% of the cucumbers that came in to the U.S. in that year from Mexico came in at or below our cost of production, was the sales price. We're selling them at a loss. The folks that have interest that may grow year-round or have interest that grow in other countries, they're interested in bringing that year-round, but it's hurting our guys. And if we don't protect our guys, then we become solely dependent on those other countries for our food, and we can't do that.
One of the things that happened during the ITC 201 blueberry case, as soon as the U.S. Trade Rep requested it, we asked the U.S. Trade Rep Lighthouser to do it. He initiated it with ITC. They were moving forward. A group immediately formed, a U.S. group that included the specialty crop groups that opposed. And the way it was funded and all, it's hard to identify them all. You can some. And then some of the testimony was in opposition. So it got pretty rough during the blueberry case. Blueberry case has been really the test where people smoked out, are you for it or not? And this review may do the same thing. We'll see. But by going for a narrow solution, hopefully we won't have as much opposition. Hopefully.
And the question was, are the people that are opposing, are these marketers and people that are, what's the second half? Marketers or? Growers. It is marketers, and the problem that we have is that there is no one representing the interest of the growers. That's where we find the challenge. So yes, there are international marketers that are sourcing fruits and vegetables from all over the world year-round. They want to see that continue. We know that we must import some fruits and vegetables to offset what we don't do during certain periods of the year. But if we allow the competition, which is much lower in labor costs, much lower in the regulatory pressure, everything that we talk about, to continue to flood the market with that cheap price, then our guys can't afford to grow it, and they're going to grow something else or go out of business. And the next time, go back to COVID, I always bring this up, there was a shortage in every section of the grocery store except produce, because our guys kept the shelves stocked. If we're dependent on other countries for our food, next time there's a pandemic or a supply chain interruption, they're going to feed themselves, and we're going to go hungry. Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Unfortunately. One more, Carla.
Yeah, we're at the official end of our program, so slip out if you need to, but if Bob's okay, we'll keep taking questions.
Okay, yeah.
Hey, just a quick question about, I'm a little bit confused on y'all's position on fixing the problem. So I've heard the quotas, the tariffs and such. In a quick way, which is, I'm sure that's not that easy, but what is your position on fixing the problem for the American farmer?
Well, the USMCA review opens the entire package up, and that would allow the U.S. Trade Rep to negotiate with Canada and Mexico or them individually. I know Ambassador Greer recently said it may be multiple agreements. It might not be one agreement like USMCA in play right now. And even though the USMCA commodities were exempt from all these tariffs coming in, products from the tariffs on products coming in, that certainly would be an option. Import quotas, there are multiple options here. What we want to do is they're moving forward and they're discussing these matters, we'll be in contact with them, and hopefully we'll have opportunities to say, this won't work for us, this timeline works for us in a seasonal window for that commodity. We're hoping to get that far.
Just anecdotally, I had a meeting this week with one of our contract growers we work with, and they're like, within 3 years, we just can't buy peppers from you anymore, just because of the price they were talking about buying it. It's not even close to what we can make it for, so.
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of people deal with that too.
The sales pitch to this administration, and every administration is different, but to this administration, they've been down this road before. They proposed a fix in USMCA 1, and it was dropped toward the end. They couldn't do it. And we're competing with a lot of other issues, even in agriculture, versus just us being on the table. So we're hoping to profile this more moving forward, and that we'll have more support behind us. I do believe the messaging from various ag groups that have interest in this is very, it's not coordinated well enough, but we're all pretty much on the same page about getting it fixed.
Yeah, I appreciate y'all working on that. And I think there's a bit of a turn of people looking a bit more domestically and a bit more inward to be almost like America centralized.
Yep. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Please join me in thanking Bob.